All right, guys, what is going on? Welcome to the iCoach VIP members section. I'm here once again with my man, Sam Miller. What's going on, Sam?
Hey, man, thanks for having me in today. Good to be here. Hope this turns out to be beneficial for everybody, but happy to share some knowledge with you today.
Hey, well, I wouldn't have brought you on here if I didn't think it would. So, guys, a little bit of background. I'll kind of let Sam tell this because he'll probably tell it better than me. But I met Sam back at Vegas at our mastermind event, and I've been consuming his content kind of ever since then. And I think that he does a very, very good job at taking a complicated subject such as hormones, which we're going to talk about today, and really just kind of taking the research, taking the complicated literature and kind of bringing it and delivering it and presenting it in a way that just makes a little bit more sense and allows you to wrap your head around everything. So, Sam, tell us a little bit more about you. Like, you have a story to tell, like everybody. Maybe not super, super deep into it, but just kind of give us like surface level backstory on you and how you got into nutrition and fitness.
Sure. So, currently located in Raleigh, North Carolina. I went to undergrad and grad school here. My journey into fitness and nutrition started in high school for me. I actually got my first personal training certification shortly. Actually, it was my last year of high school. That started my journey and my quest for knowledge, mainly to improve my own health and fitness, but also was able to help others around me. And over time, kind of ended up more on the nutrition side with some personal training still built in there, and focusing kind of on subset areas with specific sciences. So hormones are super fascinating to me, cognitive function, some of those deeper layers that we don't always touch when we're just talking about basic calories and macros.
Yeah, man. So I read somewhere, if I'm not mistaken, you had some type of like traumatic brain injury at some point to a degree. Is that right?
So I was, it's kind of an interesting combination, but that's what they think. So I had an MRI on my pituitary that showed I had heterogeneous enlargement of my pituitary, which basically means it's hard to distinguish what's going on, but you could classify it as swelling, just like if you roll your ankle and it starts to swell. Generally, that swelling would not necessarily be a good thing in terms of your range of motion, functionality, all that stuff. So my journey on the hormone side, I had a pretty bad concussion snowboarding actually when I was a teenager. And that's also during a pretty developmental phase in your life and also with your hormones as well. I didn't really have a ton of symptoms, I guess you could say, initially, but it kind of caught up with me. Especially, I noticed that if my nutrition and training weren't really optimized, I seemed to swing more than the average person. So the average person might be a little more resilient to changes in sleep, training, nutrition. But if your pituitary gland's having a hard time being that governor or regulator, you have a harder time controlling what's going on. So that led me down a path of working with different medical professionals, having different blood work done, and ultimately learning some of that information for myself. And now I do work and help clients with that, and kind of branched out of just the nutrition, but kind of using fitness and nutrition as a way to help people stabilize what's going on with their internal biochemistry.
Gotcha. Man, that's powerful. I mean, it's so crazy how like something happens to us in our life and then that almost like dictates, what we do. Like I talk about it all the time. Like, I like hit rock bottom and basically had to completely change my life around, going from like, not helping anybody to now dedicating it towards helping as many people as I can. And like, maybe it's not something like that, but maybe it's an incident like, getting something like a TBI and having to go through all those different medical situations to be able to now pay it forward later on.
And I will tell people too that I think mine was exacerbated by my lack of nutrition knowledge at the time. So I was trying to basically undergo a physical transformation. And yes, I did have the head injury, but you have to remember that if your pituitary is responsible for stabilizing things and perceiving, well, basically your hypothalamus and your pituitary are part of this hormonal axis in your body, and they perceive outside stressors and internal stressors and internal functionality of your different hormones. So if you have an outside stressor like a lack of food, or you have an internal stressor like an injury, or something, those can go hand in hand. So I think my lack of solid nutrition at the time, I mean, I would pull something out of like Men's Health which was designed for a 45-year-old guy with a beer belly. And I was a teenager, like that wasn't the right amount of food for me. So I think the nutritional shifts combined with a pretty severe concussion, and then ultimately the pituitary swelling that was kind of going on for, like a year or so, could have definitely combined to cause what ultimately caused me to learn a lot about hormones. So that's kind of what got me here today. But yeah, I totally agree. Your story, and then, especially, our mentor, Jason, like he had kind of his relationship with food shaped the way he now coaches nutrition. So it's cool to see how, things that impact our lives can then allow us to teach others.
Absolutely. I love that. So overall, like 10,000 foot view, hormones right now, gut health, like these are all very sexy topics. If you go to Instagram, like everybody and their mother is posting about these things, it seems like. So like, in your opinion, like where are we at with hormones in general in 2018?
It's very interesting, right? So I think we have hormonal complications that are a result of people who are truly out of shape and truly just need fitness and nutrition in their life. And then I think we're also experiencing people who have hormonal profile problems due to maybe too much exercise and not eating enough. So a huge part of the hormonal state of things, I think it comes back to like self-awareness and your basic habits, which I know we talked a little bit about before hopping on the call today. And I think the state of things, I think some people are perfectly okay in terms of their hormonal profile, and they really just need to dial in their nutrition and their training. And then I think there are people that have a legitimate problem. Granted, the percentages are going to vary depending on, where you're at and what type of environment you're in. But I would say that it really does depend.
Yeah. Like most things we talk about.
Yeah. I'd say if I had to generalize it, we either have folks that are having insulin issues because they're overweight, and that hormonal issue can be fixed by just getting in shape, right? So technically it's a hormonal problem, but the hormones and the problem isn't keeping you from losing weight. You can, by losing weight, you're going to fix that hormonal problem. Or like exercising, if you're not exercising at all, can actually help your thyroid. So if you're totally inactive, then cool, like let's get off the couch and be active. That's a habit thing. It's a hormonal problem, but the root of the problem is your habits, not that you just were genetically born with terrible hormones. Then there's the other side of the equation, which is athletes and people who are training hard and have downregulation in their hormones. Now I think that where the people are really training hard, that's what warrants the discussion of, okay, like this is actually like an issue with your hormones.
Right. Well, and I think that, I mean, I don't know what happened when you had your injury, and I know it's a little bit different, but like, I feel like a lot of people either they jump to conclusions and they go and get blood work and all this testing done like really, really fast from the very beginning, or maybe they'll just ignore it, or they'll go to their doctor and their doctor just ignores it, and they wait maybe too long. So I mean, obviously you had a head injury, but from the testing and looking into hormones, like how was that experience for you? Is that something that you had to dig into more just to get the test even done, or did they know everything that needed to be done?
So it was interesting. So my primary care physician was not supportive of testing it, but he didn't really connect the dots. But I was seeing a kind of sports specialist. There was a practice that basically had a doctor, a chiropractor, a naturopath, like kind of a multifaceted facility. And I was playing sports in high school, and I was going to see them anyways for some basic work. And then they did some testing on me, some muscle testing, other things. We're walking through some of the symptoms I was experiencing in terms of general fatigue and energy levels and stuff like that. And ultimately, they were the ones that ordered the labs for me that then led me to go see an endocrinologist. The endocrinologist is the one who ordered the MRI of my skull at the time. So, and my brain and like all the glands and stuff that are up in there. So for me, because I was doing things that would have theoretically, the endocrinologist is going to be like, okay, like, are you active? Are you in the proper weight range for your height and all those things? And so ultimately that started the testing for me. And then we were doing kind of quarterly blood work. I did the MRI, we did some other testing. So I think for them, it was a pretty interesting case because mine wasn't super normal, but what's been good about mine over time is like, it was able to recover. It's just a lot more sensitive, and like certain things will kind of trigger it in terms of whether it's training or sleep or food related. So that's, I think the most common experience is that people tend to get a little pushback from their primary care physician, who largely deals with an unhealthy population that's overweight in the United States. So having a good specialist that you can go see, or having someone in your corner, like, whether it's a nutrition coach or health coach that can give you the proper labs or list of labs to go check, I think can be super beneficial as a part of your fitness journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I mean, I think that's one thing that like I've seen so much. I mean, it's like there's so many clients that come to us because, I mean, let's be honest, right? Like most clients that are hiring a nutrition coach, especially paying at maybe a higher rate than your typical $50 meal plan, like they've been trying to figure out things on their own. And like there are definitely situations where, especially if they come to you with an issue already, like if they come to you, they've already been diagnosed with a thyroid issue, or they come to you and they have all this blood work to show you. I mean, you can't like ignore that. And I think as a coach, like, again, we have to stay in our lane and not go outside of our scope. But I also think that like being able to educate ourselves on all of these things and being able to kind of take the conversation from what the doctor is talking about back down to, our client's level, and just kind of help them understand and educate them on the process.
Yeah, definitely. I think scope is important because you're not going to be treating, especially if it's something that was either chronic illness or let's say they did have trauma. So in the case of, with whether it's men or women, like if, in terms of females, like if they had to have some sort of surgery that impacted their reproductive hormones, that would definitely fall outside of the scope of nutrition. But if someone is overtraining and they're not eating enough, I think that falls in your scope where like you are pretty much obligated to do the best you can to bring them back into a healthy range. And you're right, rarely will you have clients come to you with labs unless they kind of like scope you out. They know they're going to start with you and they say a month out, okay, what do I need if I'm going to start on November 1st? But that's pretty rare. So a lot of times this discovery process is happening during the phase of just general nutrition coaching, kind of like over the course of the lifespan of a client.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I always say. It's like, no matter whether there's like a hormonal issue or not, it's like we're looking into and we're addressing like nutrition, lifestyle, exercise first, before anything most of the time. And that's why, our conversation we had before this in terms of like habits, like I think that's why Precision Nutrition with their habit-based coaching model has served so well, because at the end of the day, like most people, that is what we're looking into. We're looking into, hey, what are all your shitty habits and the lowest hanging fruit that we can start to identify and slowly but surely start to improve these things. And that's how you actually build a lifestyle rather than just,
Yeah.
So, cool. So let's start diving into some of these hormones. A lot of these hormones, most people maybe have never even heard of. I think some of them maybe they have, but others maybe they've seen, on a yearly blood work report that they did at their annual doctor visit. So let's start off with cortisol first. Just kind of give us like what is cortisol and just kind of a general overview of that.
Sure. So cortisol is a glucocorticoid or corticosteroid that's essentially a stress hormone in the body. But the problem with people just calling it a stress hormone is it doesn't really account for the fact that like we do need some cortisol to live and to wake up and to function every day. So in a perfect world, you'd have cortisol balance that would look like a cortisol elevation in the morning to help get you going, or cortisol elevation to basically give you enough energy to go about your day, do your training, be out and about, and all that good stuff. You'd naturally have a decline in cortisol in the evening. When cortisol is elevated in the evening, you start to feel wired and tired. So basically think of cortisol more like your your schedule for your body or your circadian rhythm or biological clock that's going on. You want a little bit, but what oftentimes happens is if we're training a lot, especially if we train multiple times per day, or if we're consuming too much caffeine or maybe not eating enough, our body perceives those things as stressors, and that stressor can then start to mess with the rhythm that's going on. So just like your heart has kind of a natural rhythm, our energy, our hormones should have a little bit of a cycle or rhythm to them. So your cortisol basically would rise in the morning, slowly fall at night, which allows your body to produce melatonin, which is another hormone that comes from your pineal gland. That melatonin helps you sleep, stay asleep, get good recovery, and then wake up again in the morning and do it all over again. So that's kind of what it should look like in kind of a picture perfect setting.
Yeah, I love that. So what about the individuals that maybe, we hear it all the time, that are having issues either falling asleep or maybe they're actually waking up throughout the night, and how is that related to cortisol?
For sure. So cortisol, I think for most people, it's the issue of falling asleep. And then the kind of secondary symptom is because cortisol is elevated and they're wired and tired and they don't fall asleep at the proper time, or they're not getting the proper amount of melatonin production. That's what's causing them to have sleep disturbances in the middle of the night, or maybe not tapering their water, or, causing them to get up and go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. There can be a lot of things there, but basically, as far as hormones and neurotransmitters in the evening, you pretty much want an elevation in melatonin. You want a little bit of GABA, serotonin to help calm you down. So when your serotonin is low, you kind of feel anxious. So we don't want anxiety in the evening. We want to feel calm. We want to feel kind of in a restful state and kind of decompress and get ready to go to sleep. So that's where I think cortisol triggers some of these other factors in terms of what's going on in our brain and body and gut. But it's not just cortisol. It's kind of this domino effect of what happens when cortisol isn't contained. So, good habits like having consistent bedtime, winding down and getting off electronics, or having some blue light glasses in the evening if you are going to be on electronics, or using an application like Flux or the Night Shift application on your iPhone can make a huge difference, just as far as easy habits to start to implement into your day-to-day routine.
Yeah, I love that, man. I love what you said about it's not just cortisol, right? Like, I think as a society, we always try to claim one thing, and we forget that hormones are very complicated, and there's a lot of different things going on. So sometimes it's hard to just boil it down to one thing. So when we go into kind of the one that I probably hear people talking about the most these days, and I know you just wrote an article on T Nation, you wrote an article for Cody's site. Cody will be on here as well, but testosterone. So let's go there.
Okay. Yeah, so testosterone is the primary male androgen, but it does exist in females too. It is an androgen in the female body, and females actually need it to feel good, to have energy, and kind of just normalize their hormones. So it's not just guys. And oftentimes what gets missed is it's the balance of testosterone to estrogen and other hormones. So in males, it's testosterone to cortisol and testosterone to estrogen. In females, we then add a couple layers of complexity, because with the monthly cycle, we basically have a rise in elevation in progesterone, and then we have a rise in elevation in estrogen. And then during those time periods, we also have testosterone in the mix as well. So testosterone in males is going to be responsible for muscle recovery, energy, libido, and even cognitive function. And those same not side effects, but those same purpose that testosterone serves in males, it also serves in females. So a little bit of testosterone is good for energy, sex drive, recovery, muscle building, even though women have a smaller total blood count of testosterone relative to other hormones. It's all about the balance of the different hormones. And in males, what you'll oftentimes notice is when cortisol gets too high is when we start to notice some issues with testosterone, and either low testosterone or just kind of other variables that are making us feel like we have low testosterone.
Yeah. Do you work with a lot of shift workers by chance, or have
So
you?
I do. Yeah, I have. I think I have right now. I know I have a police officer and at least 3 nurses. So my nurses work in a hospital setting for the most part. They're usually on 312s, so they work 3 12-hour shifts. My police officer works 16s sometimes because they're really understaffed right now, and it can be a problem. But what we try and do is just kind of manage it as best we can. Take naps on the days you're not working, and then have a normal sleep schedule. Do as much as you can on the days that you're not working, and just mitigate the damage on the day that you do work that long shift. So shift work can definitely impact your hormones, and part of it too is just your light exposure. So by being awake a really long time, by being exposed to light, by staying awake longer, you have less melatonin production. Your cortisol kind of stays elevated, especially if you're dealing with stressful situations.
Yeah, and being a nurse or a doctor or a firefighter or a police officer, like you're probably working in some pretty stressful situations.
Yeah, I've worked with some firefighters before as well, and actually a couple of them had some hormonal dysregulation just from being there overnight, getting having to wake up in the middle of the night if they get called to a fire. For my police officers and stuff, usually the issue starts with they're sitting in a squad car all day, so they're sedentary, and then they're also expected to work these long shifts, potentially impacting their workouts, impacting their sleep. So, but then that still comes back to their habits are getting messed up by their job. So it's not that they like genetically have this predisposition to a hormonal problem. It's mainly their schedule. So something we try and do is just work within the schedule as best we can.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. My wife's a nurse. Her first year as a nurse, she worked nights, like literally gained like 30 pounds working nights, and then went back to days, lost the 30 pounds over another year. Like
That's crazy.
Crazy. Yeah. And I work with tons of nurses, firefighters. We could probably dig into that pretty deep, but no, that's a good overview of testosterone. So on the other side of it, like digging into kind of just an overall view of estrogen, then yeah, let's dive into that.
So estrogen is a primary female hormone, but also exists in males. So estrogen in males can't be created naturally from your organs or glands or reproductive system. Basically, the body has to convert testosterone into estrogen. There's an enzyme called aromatase that basically takes the T and makes it an E. So the simple conversion is, your body naturally should be producing testosterone, or even if you're on a hormone replacement taking testosterone, your body has a mechanism to help regulate for your testosterone from getting too kind of out of line. It will convert some of it to estrogen, and then other parts of it will be bound either to albumin or sex hormone binding globulin, which renders that testosterone less active or potent. Estrogen in females is usually associated with more the physical feelings of estrogen. Estrogen can definitely impact your energy, your mood, water retention, general feelings, and just, it is a part of the monthly cycle for females. In males, estrogen, if there's too much estrogen, you start to run into like the side effects of like unwanted fat gain. You'll end up with these estrogen deposits in your adipose tissue or fat tissue. And sometimes you'll notice in guys like that tend to have estrogen related issues, it will show up in your chest just as a result of kind of a hormonal imbalance. But there are, one of the ways to combat that is by losing body fat will help with estrogen levels in men. Also, you can manage it through some foods and supplementation, but kind of starts with those habits. Usually the estrogen levels is because of body fat, but I have seen some people that are just more prone to like converting testosterone to estrogen. With females, generally by lifting a little bit more, by eating enough, being active, they can positively shift estrogen dominance more towards progesterone and testosterone, and managing stress is really important there too. So for females, don't be afraid to resistance train. Having a proper balance of protein, carbohydrates, and fats can all be really important in terms of your overall health with your progesterone and estrogen.
Yeah, it's good. Do you, I hear like estrogen dominance, like that's something that kind of gets brought up quite a bit. But more so, I guess my question would be like on the environmental side. You hear a lot of people like talking about like switching from the plastics to the glass and different things like that. So on the environmental side and its effect on estrogen levels, like, is it like, where are you at with that, all that?
I think it comes back to your big rocks, right? So like if you are eating McDonald's for 2 of your meals and then the one meal that you prep, you put in glass, that's not going to solve the estrogen problem. So like if you've tackled, okay, like we're meal prepping, we're active, we're getting to the gym, we're getting our steps in, I'm sleeping, 7 to 8 hours a night. Cool. You've hit the big rocks. Now it's okay to worry about like glass versus plastic and drinking your water out of stainless or glass instead of plastic water bottles. But I really, that's not like something, if someone comes to me with a hormone issue, the first thing I don't like put in the intake form, do you eat out of plastic? That's not something that I do. But for someone that does have a severe issue, I think it's kind of like the same philosophy I use with some nutritional stuff like workout nutrition. Even if it makes a 5% difference or 10% difference, I'm going to, or 2% difference, I'm going to take that chance because to me, I want that 5% for my transformation or for my clients. If I know that, plus you can reuse the glass, like a simple switch, like Tupperware, right? It's like if you can reuse the glass and put in the dishwasher versus running through plastic containers all the time, I think you might as well just use the glass containers. But I think people stressing out about it with environmental estrogens and the toxicity stuff, I still think you have to come back to your priorities with your health and fitness, because technically we can store more toxins in fats anyway. So if you're eating fatty foods, there's toxins in like grain-fed beef that, if it's like 70% lean beef, we're not talking about like 90% lean grass-fed beef. Grass-fed beef is totally different. But let's say you're talking about like non-organic, mass agricultural production foods, you can have toxins and estrogens and stuff like in the fats, and then essentially you're storing it in your fat. If you have more fat, you're more likely to have more estrogen. Like as a male, you have that aromatase enzyme converting testosterone to estrogen. If you're a female, you can store some toxins and stuff in the fat. But I think some people are hyper focusing on that and they're like in a calorie surplus and they're not working out. And I think you kind of have to take, it's like one layer at a time to kind of build the foundation first.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it's so in our ebook that's dropping here soon, there's a hormone section and we go through all of these, and it's kind of what we're doing right now. I mean, it's very, surface level, but what's funny is kind of the lifestyle hacks at the end of each section. They're all very, very, very similar, which is sleep and, all these things that we keep talking about. And that's why it's like, I love what you say with identifying like the big rocks first, or like what I always say, identify those lowest hanging fruit first. And like, there's 50 things that we could start off with and start improving, but like the all or nothing approach, that doesn't typically work. And so I can sit here and tell you you're doing 50 things wrong, but like, let's identify the one thing that's going to move us forward the most, get you that win, and then we can start building from there.
Yeah, there's a ton of analogies, but it's kind of like, I heard this the other day. It was like to build your body, it might take 10,000 drops in a bucket. And some of us are so worried about having the perfect drop when really like we just need to start getting drops in the bucket and like making that change and making those differences. So like, whether it's your macros being off by 2 grams or, if you hit your hydration goal, but one day you drink out of a plastic water bottle, like the water for your body is probably more important than like if you dehydrated yourself all day from not drinking because you didn't have like the perfect water bottle. I think cumulatively, like if you're looking at the grand scale of things over time, I think people who are exposed to environmental estrogens, and let's say you did that every day and you heat your food in plastic and you put hot prep food into plastic and you drink out of a water bottle that sits in your car and in Texas in 100-degree weather, and then you like reconsume that. I think those are extremes, and I think they can definitely negatively impact your health. But yeah, I think some people would be so overwhelmed by the amount of change that it's just not like a realistic starting point for some people. If you're a beginner, if you're super advanced, then yeah, like I've been training for over 10 years now. I've been eating pretty healthy for that same period of time. For me to switch to glass Tupperware and focus on what I'm drinking my water out of is a lot easier now because I've got the basics down for the most part.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, super transparent. When I went to the hormone specialist certification with Travis, and he started talking about environmental toxins, I mean, it scared the hell out of me. I was just like, so let alone, somebody off the street, like that can be extremely overwhelming.
Yeah, and there are little switches, right? So like I did the glass Tupperware switch, and then I say do one at a time. So like let's say you run out of soap in the bathroom. Okay, cool. Let's try and find the best, healthiest soap at a reasonable price. And then after the soap, okay, cool. I'm out of dishwasher detergent or I'm out of laundry detergent. But like to go replace everything in your house right now, first of all, like most people aren't going to just like throw $1,000 into becoming environmentally sound. So it's like do one thing at a time. When you got to go to the store, we'll do soaps and skincare products and deodorants and stuff like that. I do try to get the best options, whether it's deodorant, soap, Tupperware, things like that can make a difference in the long term. But if you get overwhelmed and then you quit your plan after a week, it's not really going to help you very much in the long term.
Yeah, I completely agree, my friend.
Cool.
Cool. Let's talk thyroid. Thyroid hormones. Hypothyroid, hyperthyroid. We hear it. I mean, I feel like I've seen as like every 1 in 8 women are getting diagnosed with a thyroid issue these days. I don't know how accurate that is, but yeah, thyroid hormones.
Cool. So I don't claim I'm definitely a little more experienced on the testosterone, estrogen, cortisol side of the equation and the androgens and estrogens, but definitely have my fair share of thyroid experience as well. I just don't, wear a t-shirt around that says like thyroid genius on it or anything, but thyroid hormones tend to, obviously they're tied to your metabolism. The primary thyroid, so I'll kind of zoom out for a second. So when your doctor checks your thyroid, a lot of times they're really just checking your TSH, which is your thyroid stimulating hormone. Your pituitary kind of governs, like it's the same thing with your gonadotropins, your androgens, your estrogens. Your pituitary gets a signal from a releasing hormone or a stimulating hormone. So TSH is a stimulating hormone. That hormone is like the trigger or the light switch. When you turn that light switch on, then your pituitary is like, okay, I need to fire up the machinery to make whatever hormone it is. Now, stress or lack of food or overeating or under-exercising can all impact the thyroid. Males actually even have thyroid receptor cells in your Leydig cells, which is actually tied to testosterone production. So people who say that thyroid is not related to testosterone and cortisol, that's not necessarily true. If you also look at someone who's anorexic or not eating enough, their cortisol will be elevated. They don't have the proper nutrients or insulin levels to blunt that cortisol. And then their thyroid can also kind of suffer because of the perceived stress. So they're down-regulating that thyroid to save energy in the body, because you have to think of like the thyroid is kind of this governor for your energy levels. And that's why sometimes like your low testosterone or low progesterone, low estrogen, low thyroid kind of go together. So when we talk about hyper or hypo, we're talking about someone either having too much thyroid hormone or not enough thyroid hormone, when really we just want the balanced amount. The biggest thing I see primary care physicians missing is they're only checking the TSH, which is the stimulating hormone. What we want to look at is you have your T3, your T4, and then you can also look at reverse T3 and T4. So oftentimes what happens in the body is you have that stimulating hormone, which produces your main kind of governing thyroid hormones, and then it's converted to a metabolically active hormone. So you want to make sure you actually have the metabolically active hormone in your body. So thyroid is one of those things where healthy habits are kind of going to serve that foundation or bedrock. Good amounts of sleep will help, and monitoring like overall stress levels. Some people are going to have certain conditions like Hashimoto's or an autoimmune disease that may impact the thyroid. But more often than not, I think sometimes people have thyroid issues because of maybe not enough food, maybe too much food or not enough activity level. So I think we start there and we start to look at the layers. So when they're looking at Hashimoto's, they're actually looking at thyroid antibodies and checking to see if your body is essentially attacking your own thyroid, which is what makes it the autoimmune condition. So that's kind of like the quick and dirty on thyroid, what you should check, how it kind of impacts you. All too often, though, I do hear people who say like, oh, I have low thyroid, that's why I'm overweight or something. But I think there's more to it than that. Sometimes like all these hormones are interrelated. So looking at one in a vacuum doesn't always serve us super well. And I think because the thyroid is so complex that oftentimes, the reason why I said like, okay, I'm not like a thyroid doc or super genius with the thyroid is I know a lot about the thyroid, but I think we have better luck actually manipulating those other hormones like cortisol or getting, in a parasympathetic state or rest and digest, impacting our testosterone levels and sleeping versus the thyroid. Like for thyroid, I think if you're eating an appropriate amount of food, whether it's in a calorie deficit to lose weight or maintenance or in a caloric surplus, and then periodizing that and taking diet breaks, I think you can really mitigate a lot of the thyroid problems. I've heard different specialists talk about taking like a thyroid glandular or different thyroid support, but I feel like it's because it's so intertwined with the whole system. You're really only going to get to that place if you're like right before needing to jump on like a thyroid replacement, like a T4 Synthroid, T3 is Cytomel, or some people get the glandular thyroid, which is like the more natural desiccated thyroid.
No, that's great info. See, this right here is why I brought Mr. Sam on. That was good. I liked how you brought that all together. Dude, I want to make sure I respect your time. I know we're busy, and you have some.
Yeah. I've still got time, man. I mean, I blocked until 3, but I don't think I have a client until a while after that, like 3:45. So we're good to roll. I think you wanted to talk about like insulin and maybe some of the hunger.
Let's do insulin, and then we'll do the hunger hormones.
Okay, cool. So insulin, obviously we've talked about in some of these other sections, but insulin is essentially just produced from your pancreas in response to eating a meal. So your blood sugar will naturally rise, and then insulin shuttles. I like to think of insulin as like a school bus to get kids. Like if you think of kids as being the sugar, it kind of brings them to a destination, right? So ideally, we want insulin driving that sugar towards the muscle cell, which would help us recover and ultimately gain muscle mass. Especially for guys, this is important. For ladies, this is important too, since insulin can oppose cortisol. They are called counter-regulatory hormones. So in my article in T Nation, I talk a lot about how testosterone, insulin, and cortisol are actually more related than we would think, and why having carbohydrates around your workout can actually help you as a natural athlete with your hormonal profile, because insulin is counter-regulatory to cortisol, and testosterone and cortisol are inverse. So basically what that means is usually as cortisol goes up, we see a decrease in testosterone levels in males, barring a few exceptions. So with insulin, the problem is typically in overweight folks, we end up with pre-diabetes symptoms or diabetes symptoms, which means basically our fasted blood glucose is likely over 100, 105, 110 or higher. Typically, this is then treated with something like metformin until ultimately they may have to go on insulin if their pancreas is non-responsive. So ways to improve insulin sensitivity would simply be to lose body fat and to go into a calorie deficit, a mix of, you still want proteins, carbs, and fats. You don't have to go zero carb to improve your insulin sensitivity. You can just be in a calorie deficit and balance out your macros. I like to combine protein, fats, and fiber with your carbohydrates if you do not have good insulin sensitivity, because fats, fiber, and protein will delay the gastric emptying of the carbohydrates. So let's say you have white rice. If you eat white rice by itself, you're going to get a different blood sugar response than let's say you have that meal and you have some vegetables with it, or you have avocado in your rice with chicken or something like that. it changes the digestive or the absorptive rate of that meal. And then what's going on is you're getting a steady release of blood sugar instead of like a spike in blood sugar, which is oftentimes what people think of when they think of like insulin and blood glucose. So that's kind of the 2-minute deal.
That's great. I love that. And one thing I love that you said too is that, I mean, a lot of people these days, like they're hearing this, they're like with the ketogenic diet coming into place, and they're like, oh, the best way to, to combat those symptoms would be to do keto. And it's like, you don't necessarily have to do that. I mean, maybe for some people, but like,
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think so far what I've seen from the studies is basically a calorie deficit should improve your insulin sensitivity if you are overweight, or even if you're just like at a normal body fat and you need to improve the insulin sensitivity. Reducing carbohydrates can help, or doing a timed carbohydrate or cyclical carbohydrate intake can help. I think going ketogenic, you can sometimes, but often you have to remember that I think there might be a couple articles out there, and you can correct me on this, but I think even, I don't know if this was Lane Norton and Joe Rogan talking about this, or if it was the episode prior, but basically some ketogenic diets, you'll actually still have fairly elevated blood glucose even on the ketogenic diet. So it's not a guarantee. It does work well for some people if it helps you to have a more sustainable approach. I like using a lower carb approach in phases, depending on, like, not for CrossFitters, not for people doing glycolytic sports, but for folks who are either a little more sedentary, or maybe it's more of a cosmetic or aesthetic approach, where you'll cycle it in for a very short period of time, but you're not staying on that diet long term. The goal is just to temporarily create a calorie restriction, or to temporarily lower insulin levels by bringing the carbs out of the diet. But I think there are a million different ways to attack that, and it's going to be pretty individual. You can also use things like glucose disposal agents to help with carbohydrate tolerance. And I think something that gets overlooked with all the flexible dieting information that's out there right now is nutrient timing. I don't think it's like 10% of your daily priorities, but I think if you're at that phase where you're really trying to get to a lower body fat, I do think that nutrient timing around the workouts can be pretty important, kind of an imperative aspect of reaching the leanness that you're looking for.
Yeah, I love that. I think that it's just so interesting. I mean, I think you were referencing the Lane Norton, Joe Rogan podcast. I listened to
I think that's
all 2.5 hours of it or whatever.
Yeah.
But one thing that Lane talks about all the time, I feel like when he's in these debates, is like, it all goes back to like, if you can get them to lose body fat, right? I mean,
you'll improve health markers and longevity.
And depending upon the person, I mean, there's some people that come to us.
Yeah, I mean, he's talking in generalities, but speaking in generalities, but generally, if you can get off the body fat, if you can get into a calorie deficit and sustain it, you can improve insulin sensitivity. But then, if I was playing devil's advocate, I could say, well, if I diet too long, I actually, the way that my hormone sensitive lipase and like all of these other things react, like ultimately I'm more sensitive to putting on fat once I get really lean, which is kind of true. Like, people think you're this like sponge when you're 4% body fat, but you can easily put on fat because your body wants to, as a survival mechanism. So I think for general population and for the folks listening to this recording, I think the most important thing is, this is another area where self-awareness and personal responsibility are super important. Your nutrition coach is going to look out for your best interest, but if you're overweight, or if you know that in the past you're eating a very carb heavy diet, maybe not enough protein and fats, there might be a period of time where we need to, have protein and fats and slightly bring back the carbohydrates. Or you could have an insulin issue from something else. But most of the time, the calorie deficit or a cycling approach, or just focusing on when you're eating, that can help. I know for me that even the amount of fiber I'm getting in a day, and vegetables and my fat intake can also impact my blood glucose response to a meal.
And you can, I mean, for those of you watching, like you can go and test this yourself, you know, like there's.
Yeah, you can get a glucometer, like if you want to play around with it. I would say, you know, ultimately though, what we're going to look at is your fasted blood glucose and your A1C levels. Actually, I'm glad I just thought of that. So for blood work for insulin, we're looking at A1C, which is kind of like the pre-diabetic, diabetic marker, and it's a really good gauge for longevity. A1C is what we check. Fasted blood glucose is kind of like, if I look at the clock right now and tell you what time it is, that's fasted blood glucose, whereas A1C is a bigger, more complete picture of everything. You know, earlier we talked about the thyroid blood work, the T3, T4, reverse T3, and TSH. I think that's important to note. And then for earlier, we talked about testosterone, but I didn't really talk about labs at all. Testosterone, you want to make sure you're also getting free testosterone. You're looking at your estradiol, and then the other variables that impact testosterone, which would be SHBG, which is an acronym for sex hormone binding globulin. Sometimes your doctors will check prolactin and stuff like that as well. I just wanted to make sure we like noted that, because I think we kind of skipped over that part. But if you're in here, if you're in this iCoach membership site, I'm assuming you're working with Justin. Justin can tell you what to do and go over that with you.
Love it, man. So hunger hormones, leptin and ghrelin. What are these? What are these little guys?
Yeah, so I try and keep these pretty simple, because ultimately they kind of, so as you get leaner, you become more sensitive to them. The best way to describe that is our bodies have receptors for these different signals and these different hormones. And generally a leaner person has a better response or a healthier response to these hunger hormones. So when you diet, you get an impact on leptin and ghrelin. Ghrelin's kind of known as the hunger hormone, but ideally, like as you get into shape, if you're sleeping the right amounts, like you can just living a healthy lifestyle and getting to a healthy body fat, you can actually do, I don't really like coach my clients through a ton of leptin and ghrelin in like super depth, or we don't really talk about it on podcasts a lot, because if I had to say out of everything on here today, leptin and ghrelin are most manipulated by like your nutrition, your lifestyle, your sleep. If you're getting enough sleep and you're eating the right amounts and you're appropriately spacing your meals, so you're not just like eating one big meal a day for all your macros, I think you can really regulate them. And, you know, just because your stomach growls doesn't necessarily mean like your ghrelin or hunger hormones are all out of whack. So just kind of try and zoom out for a second and just remember that those are largely a byproduct of your body fat percentage and calorie intake, sleep, and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that, man. All right, so wrapping all of this up, you know, we've talked about a few different hormones here, but what would be your like top 5 tips for, you know, addressing maybe if somebody had a hormonal imbalance, or whether they did or they didn't, like from a nutrition, lifestyle, exercise standpoint, like what are the 5 big rocks, as you said, to just making sure that you're in a good place?
Sure. So the first one is going to be slow wave sleep. So slow wave sleep is a stage of sleep. So number 1 is going to be sleep on here, but not all sleep is the same. So we want to make sure that we're getting that level of sleep, because that's when hormonal production, or the bulk of it, tends to occur. By maximizing slow wave sleep, we're actually going to improve testosterone production, growth hormone production, and hormonal balance. So that's super important. So I always place sleep number 1. I'm going to put nutrition number 2, but making sure it's periodized with number 3, which would be your training. Nutrition is very important, because if you don't have the right amount of diet breaks, if you stayed in a calorie deficit all the time, you might lose a lot of fat, but you're not going to feel, it's not a sustainable lifestyle. You're not going to feel great. You're not going to have great energy or focus. I know that's something that impacts me when I'm not eating enough. It makes it hard to focus on business stuff or coaching. The third one being training, periodizing your training, having periods of planned overreaching followed by recovery phases, because that has to match up with your nutrition. So ideally, if you're really pushing things from an athletic standpoint, you'd likely give yourself more calories. If you're kind of doing a recomposition or focusing on your body composition, you could lower the calories a little bit, just because the injury risk is lower. So really technical, like one of the main causes for injuries, both in youth sports and adult sports, can actually be tied to nutrition. So that's something that gets kind of overlooked, but it's related to both hormones and also related to your actual musculoskeletal system and injuries and stuff there too. So that's 2 and 3. 4, this kind of ties back to 1, but I'm going to call it something different. So stress management would be number 4 for your hormones. Even though you could 2, 3, and 4 are arguably like all kind of in close proximity to each other. It's not like stress management is less important. I think both mental stress management and physical stress management, sometimes we forget about the physical aspect, or we think of stress as like only work stress, but we have to think about life stress, family stress, the amount of physical activity we have, exercise stimulus, and everything there. So 4 would be stress management, because that's going to help us balance that parasympathetic and sympathetic state, which can just keep us in a more neutral hormonal building profile. 5, so I normally focus on sleep, food, activity level. I guess you could say you could supplement for that, but I'm going to be more general for 5 and just say like your overall quality of life and balance, because you have to balance the previous 4 things. So let's say you're sleeping all the time, but you're not eating appropriately, or you're overtraining. Well, your overtraining is making you tired, and you're not eating enough is also making you in an energy deprived state. So then you're sleeping all the time. Just because you like hit a home run with number 1 doesn't mean you're balanced. So number 5 would be balance and quality of life, because quality of life also ties back to stress. And I think oftentimes people don't realize like the physical symptoms of hormonal complications, and really where it shows up is in your quality of life, probably sooner rather than later compared to the other physical symptoms or long-term health effects. So that would be 5, kind of snuck in there as a caveat. And then if I had to pick something different, I'd say supplements, but intelligent supplement selection with clinical dosages.
Yeah, I love that, man. Very, very similar. So dude, first off, man, thank you so much for taking the time today to educate. Hopefully this was valuable for those of you that are watching. And like I said, once all this is launched, I'll be sure to pull you in there so you can watch yourself here.
Very cool. Yeah, so I can see my little square in the top corner. Well, I guess I'm in a big square on yours, and then
so the way it'll view is it'll have 2 squares, one at the top, one at the bottom. So they'll see both of us in a little conversation.
side by side, kind of. Cool.
Yeah, where can everybody find you at? Website, social media, all those things.
Definitely. So we're on kind of the 2 main forms of social media, potentially more coming soon. But on Instagram, my company page is Oracle_coaching. My personal page is Sam Miller Science. So that's my first name and my last name followed by the word science. And then our website is oraclefitness.com. On Facebook, we're Oracle Training and Nutrition. A lot of those videos we've had up for a while, but there's a lot of great free content on there. So it's not really like you don't have to pay to be in a course. It's just something I kind of accumulated over time. And the longer videos live over there. The short, like quick hitting stuff, I try to address mostly with Instagram stories and like quick posts and captions and stuff like that. But that's kind of the primary areas. For stuff like this, so Justin and I can kind of talk about the audio with this, but for recordings and articles, that's going to be on the website. So that's on oraclefitness.com /free content, where there's a little tab on there. So all that is free, has articles linked to other sites like Endocrine Nutrition, Boom Boom Performance, and iTunes for all of the podcasts.
Awesome, my man. Dude, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm going to hit unrecord here, and then we'll finish out.